All right, shalom, shalom, and welcome back to another episode, right? Episode 2, right, of characteristics of a righteous man. And this one we're going to go into loyalty, right? But before we get into it, I want to give all praise, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rechak. Double honors to the elder apostles and elder bishops of Great Millstone, who rule very well, very beautifully. Double salutations to the Akim I heard pushing this gospel in truth and sincerity to the best of their ability, given to them by Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai. Peace, blessings, and salutations be unto the elect scattered abroad. May the election of Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Lord willing, fall upon your houses. And again, first, before I get into it, Salakia for any kind of wind, or any kind of background noise. I had, taking the kids to the park, man. Spirit just kind of hopped on me, to get this lesson in, but nonetheless, again, right, this episode is going to be going into loyalty, right, which is a characteristic of, an elect member, right, loyalty to Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai. So I ultimately pulled up, it says, what is, as you see right here, what does showing God loyalty look like, right? And I pulled up, and this is the AI overview. I want to get this first paragraph right here. It says, showing loyalty to God involves a commitment to worship him alone, right? Following his commandments and demonstrating faith through obedience and service even in difficult times. So, ultimately loyalty can be interchangeable with, faith, man, which is heavy, if you're ultimately faithful to Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai, right, it means that you're loyal to Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai, and again, it says even in difficult times, and it brings you to my first precept, which I'm going to go into the commentary a little bit just to get a better understanding, right, of, this scripture. But it says it's Revelations chapter 2, and I'll start at verse 1, also like verse 12, right, as it says right here, the message to the church in Pergamum. It says, and this is the NLT, right, in verse 12, it says, write this letter to the angel of the church in Pergamum, right, which when you go into the angel goes into basically the bishop that was over the church, at the time, right? It says, this is the message from the one with the sharp two-edged sword. I know that you live in the city where Satan has his throne, yet you have remained loyal to me. You refuse to deny even when Antipas, my faithful witness, was martyred among you in Satan's city, right? Now, I want to go into, again, the commentary on this, right, and ultimately go into, the difficulties that they were facing, right? We're going to go into the David Gusick commentary, and we're going to scroll down to the verse 12, and we'll get into it. All right, it should be coming up soon. Right here. It says Revelations 2 and 12, right? It says Yahweh Shai describes himself to the church of Pergamos. We're actually going to skip this point because I want to just hit the point. It says right here, Revelation 2 and 13, what Yahweh Shai knows about the church of Pergamos. It says, I know your works and where you dwell, where Satan's throne is, and you hold fast to my name and did not deny my faith, even in the days in which Antipas, my faithful martyr, who was killed among you, where Satan dwells, right? It says, I know their works, and it kind of, again, gives you, a better understanding. When you go into the commentary, it gives you a better understanding of really what these churches were dealing with, man, at the time, right? It says, I know your works. It says, Yahweh Shai said this to each church. It is true of each one of us. He knows our works, even if there isn't much to know. It says, and where you dwell, where Satan's throne is in many ways, Pergamos was a stronghold of satanic power, which, you can liken, right, Pergamos, says we're going to get into, really to America, right? Because there's a lot of pagan, and false God worship here, man, right? All different types of, religions are here in America, man, right? And this is why this place, right, is also called, Babylon, right? The root word being Babel, which means confusion, right? There's a lot of confusion here, man. All these different, religions right? It says, there are many different opinions as to why Pergamos was such a stronghold of satanic power. It says some believe it was because Pergamos was a center of pagan religion, especially of Asclepios Soter, right? Which is, when you look that up, right? Asclepios is basically that serpent wrapped around that staff, like you see on these ambulances at the hospitals, right? That emblem with that snake going around, right? That was that, Asclepios, man, right? It says, or Asclepios Savior, right? Savior, right? Some believe it was because Pergamos had a huge throne-like altar dedicated to the Roman god Zeus, right? It says some believe it was because Pergamos was a center for the ancient Babylonian priesthood, but this is tough to prove conclusively. Others believe it was because Pergamos was the political center of the worship-demanding Roman government. It says, as you hold fast my name, despite the fact they lived in such a difficult city, the Christians of Pergamos, which we know, right, are going back to the Israelites, man, right? It's not, dealing with these pagan Christians today, right? This is going back to, the followers, right, of, Yahweh Shai, right, which, they call Christians, which, the proper term would be Hamashiachim, right? Those that follow the anointed, right? Yahweh Shai, right? It says held fast to their faith in Yahweh Shai, right? And that's in the midst, again, of all these different, religions and false idol worship and different holidays that were being worshipped and whatnot, all the different sacrifices and that were being done, in these times, It says, did not deny my faith. It says, Yahweh Shai praised the Hamashiachim of Pergamos because they did not deny his faith. It is always important to make sure that the faith we hold on to is the faith that belongs to Yahweh Shai. And that's important, right? Because without Yahweh Shai, we'd be over, man. We'd be done. We would be completely and utterly destroyed, man. It says, Antipas, my faithful martyr, who was killed among you. It says, one specific man of the Hamashiachim of Pergamos received a precious title, faithful martyr. The same title was held by Yahweh Shai also. It says, Antipas was a man who followed Yahweh Shai, who was like Yahweh Shai. It says, Antipas, one of the great, almost anonymous heroes in the Bible. History tells us nothing about him except for here. It is no much ecclesiastical history makes mention of this martyr Antipas, which argues him to have been a person, but of obscure note. Slack. Let's go back to it. Satan, man. Right. It says right here, right, obscure note in the world, but Yahweh Shai seeth and taketh notice of those little ones who belong to him, though the world overlooks them. It says, Antipas lived where Satan's throne was, yet he stood against the attacks and the evil around him. He fulfilled the meaning of his name because Antipas means against all, right? And ultimately what happened to him is they ultimately put him into, one of those brazen bulls and basically cooked him, man, But see, the Wadi Yahweh Shem Shai, this man, right, he ultimately, the Lord ultimately, took his spirit, called him up, and when they opened it up, right, when they opened up the brazen bull, it was as if he never had been, his clothes weren't singed, right? This man, he wasn't cooked or anything like that, right? So ultimately Yahweh Shem Shai delivered him, from that situation, man, but that's all I wanted to read on that. But again, because again, going back to, right, it says, what is showing the Most High loyalty look like, right? And it says, and even in difficult times. Here, let me put on my do not disturb. It's, it also says, it says, here's more detailed look at what loyalty to the Most High might look like. It says worship and obedience, right? It says worship him alone, right? Loyalty to the Most High means prioritizing him in your life and focusing on worship and prayer. And that's absolutely true, man. Right? We've been called into this thing, man. Right? And as the scriptures say, to walk worthy, right, of our vocation wherewith we have been called, right? And you know that being worthy is what? Serving the Lord, man. Right? To the best of our ability, right? Putting Yahweh Shem El Shah first over all, right, aspects of our life. Even our immediate family, you know what I mean? Our jobs, right? Everything, right? Everything that that we deal with in life, man. We put Yahweh Shem El Shah before all that. You know what I mean? It says, follow his commandments, obeying the Most High's word and principle is a key expression of loyalty. That's right, man. You know what I mean? Scriptures say, matter of fact, let's grab that real quick. In Hebrews, let me switch it to the KJV. In Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 6, hitting the point, it says, but without faith, right, again, right, loyalty and faith are interchangeable, right? It says, but without faith, it is impossible to please him. For he that cometh to the Most High must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of them that diligently seek him. That's right, man. Right? So you can't call yourself being loyal to Yahweh Shem El Shai, right, if you're not going to do the things that are pleasing unto the Lord, right? Seeking the Lord, right? It also says that they that fear the Lord, which will do that which is well pleasing unto the Lord, right? And we understand that fear, and faith go hand in hand, right? Scriptures say that, the fear of the Lord was, created created with the faithful in the womb. You know what I mean? Roughly paraphrasing, man. So again, they go hand in hand, But let's go ahead and go back to this. It says, seek his guidance, actively listening to the Most High's voice and seeking his wisdom in your decisions, right? It says faith and trust. See, here you go. It says trust in the Most High's promise, right? It says even when facing challenges, which we were just going into, right? An example, right, of our forefathers facing, challenges, right? Constantly being around, right, these different, religions and even being persecuted, right, for, preaching Yahweh Shai. You know what I mean? And as the scripture says, strive for the truth unto death, right? Meaning remain loyal unto me, even if it means your life, right, being taken, right? And the Lord shall fight for us, right? The Lord is going to come to bat for us. The Lord is going to deliver us, right, out of said situation. You know what I mean? Or the Lord will ultimately have us, right, suffer that persecution, right, whether it be small persecution or even, again, our lives being taken. And what will that do, right? That will allow for, that glorification, right, from Yahweh Shem Yahushai, And there are going to be men that are going to have to, ultimately be put to death, right, for the name of Yahweh Shem Yahushai, as we read in Revelations 20 and verse 4, right? Those that will be beheaded, right, for the word and the testimony of Yahweh Shem Yahushai, right? That's going to happen, in this time frame. It says trust in the Most High's promise. It says even when facing challenges, maintain faith in God's promises and his ability to deliver, right? It says rely on God's strength. It says look to God as your source of strength and comfort rather than relying solely on your own abilities. That's right. Practice gratitude, expressing thanks to the Most High for his blessings and faithfulness, right? Always, right? Scriptures say to give thanks in all things, right? It says serving others, right? And I'm gonna just read some of these, bulletins real quick. It says love and care for others, be a positive influence, forgive others, character and conduct, honesty, integrity, humility, meekness, perseverance, and that's all, I want to grab, as far as that. But again, the main point, right, being faithful, right, loyalty and faith, right, are interchangeable, that being the point. I want to grab a couple more scriptures, right, just to build on that, right? This is Psalms chapter 37 and verse 5. It says, commit thy way. Actually, you know what? We'll start at verse 4. It says, delight thyself also in Yahweh Shem El Shai. He shall give thee the desire of thine heart, right? It says, commit thy way unto the Lord. Trust also in him, and he shall bring it to pass, right? And we just went into that, right? One of those, as you see, right, it says faith and trust. It says trust in the Most High's promises, So we gotta trust in Yahweh B'Shem Yahushai, man. Right? That the Lord said he's gonna do something, you best believe he's gonna do it, right? His word shall not return unto him void, nor is he the man, nor is he a man that he should lie. So when the Lord speaks a word, they best believe that it's going to come to pass, man. So we ultimately ride on that, right? The Lord said that those that serve him are ultimately going to receive blessings, right? Apostle Peter, right, ultimately inquired of that in Matthew, the 19th chapter of Yahushua, right? We have forsaken all, right? What shall we have, And he said, ye shall have 100-fold, right? If you forsake mother, father, house, daughter, son, so on and so forth, right? All these different things, right? If we put those things last to Yahweh B'Shem Yahushai, hey, we're going to receive 100-fold, and that's going to be in the kingdom, That's going to be in the kingdom, man. And when you go into that word commit, it goes into pledge, right? It says pledge that, when you go on the online etymology, I got it pulled up right here. No, I don't. But just real quick, it says pledge or bind to a certain course or policy. And we pledged as soon as we came into this, this ministry. As soon as the Lord called us into this ministry, it was, we basically pledged, right, our the rest of our lives to serving Yahweh B'Shem Yahushai, right? Which when you go into that word, pledge, it goes back to the synonym, of vow, right? We made a vow with Yahweh B'Shem Yahushai, right, to do his will, and we can't ultimately turn back on that, right? I'll grab a quick precept to build on that. This is Deuteronomy chapter 23 and verse 21. It says, when thou shalt vow a vow unto Yahweh B'Shem Yahushai thy power, thou shalt not slack to pay it, right? And we're doing that, right? We're in debt with the Lord, man, because we made a vow and broke it, so we have to pay, what I mean, which we're doing now. But nonetheless, right, we, again, as soon as we came into this ministry, as soon as we were called, right, and started to do this work, we made a vow that we were going to continue to do it all the way into the end, right? Because we counted the cost. We knew what the scriptures say about those that put their hand to the plow, you know what I mean, and look back. They're not fit for the kingdom, man. So again, we made that pledge. We made that vow, right? It says, for Yahweh B'Shem Yahushai, thy power will surely require it of thee, and it would be sin in thee, right? So if we made a vow and we didn't ultimately keep it, guess what, man? That would be, it would be, as it says right here, it would be a sin in thee, right? Verse 22, but if thou shalt forbear to vow, it shall be no sin in thee, right? So let's go back to that Proverbs, or that Psalms, Salakia. Psalms 37, and we'll continue on in verse 6. It says, he shall bring forth thy righteousness as the light, and thy judgment as the noonday. Rest in Yahweh B'Shem Yahushai, and wait patiently for him, right? Because part of that faith, right, part of that loyalty is ultimately waiting, right, for what the Lord, said he's going to give us, man. It says, fret not thyself because of him who prospereth in his way, because of the man who bringeth wicked devices to pass, right? It says, cease from anger and forsake wrath. Fret not thyself in any wise to do evil, right? It says, for evildoers shall be cut off, but those that wait upon Yahweh B'Shem Yahushai shall inherit the earth. And this is what, we're waiting for, right? We're waiting to ultimately inherit the earth, right? Being heirs to that promise, right? With Yahushai, being joint heirs with Yahushai to that promise, man, And see, again, we believe this through faith, right? We believe that Yahweh B'Shem Yahushai is going to, perform those promises, right? And real soon, right? Because he's given us these signs, It says, verse 11, it says, but the meek shall inherit the earth and shall delight themselves in the abundance of peace, And this is, again, right, what's coming, right? Peace, right? Peace is coming to those that are loyal to Yahweh B'Shem Yahushai. Peace is coming to those that are faithful to Yahweh B'Shem Yahushai, And again, we have many examples of that, right? Yahweh B'Shem Yahushai, again, our forefathers remaining faithful even in troubling times, and being delivered, right? And ultimately receiving, blessings for it. Actually, we can go into Daniel's, I think it's verse 6 or chapter 6. And they ultimately, Daniel was ultimately praying, right? When there were men that ultimately made it, to where you're not to pray to any other God except for the king, right? And they those men end up finding, Daniel praying, and they went to go turn him in, and the punishment was him being thrown in the lion's den, But let's see, ultimately, how Daniel responded, right? And really what the Lord ultimately did for him, right? It says Daniel 6 and I'll start right here. It says Daniel 6 and 7. It says, all the presidents of the kingdom, the governors and the princes, the counselors and the captains have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree that whosoever shall ask a petition of any god or man for 30 days, save of thee, O king, he shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the decree, assign the writing, that it be not changed, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which altereth not. Wherefore King Darius signed the writing in the decree. Now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went into his house, and his windows being open in his chamber toward Jerusalem, he kneeled upon his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before the Most High, as he did aforetime. And one of those, again, right, going back to loyalty, right? One of those characteristics as we go into, that show forth loyalty, right? It says right here, right here it says, no, that's not what I want. Right, practice gratitude, right? Faith and trust, practice gratitude, right? It says expressing thanks to the Most High for his blessings and faithfulness, right? Which is, what Daniel is showing there, right? Praying to the Lord and giving him thanks, right? Again, they went and told the king about that, right? And he had to, basically, stick to his word. Say, hey, we got to throw this man in, right? Even though we didn't want to, right? Daniel was beloved, of the king, man. King Darius, man. But hey, nonetheless, right? He had to issue it, right? Dropping down to verse 16, it says, then the king commanded, they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. Now the king spake and said unto Daniel, thy power whom thou servest continually, he will deliver thee. And a stone was brought and laid upon the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet and with the signet of his lords, that the purpose might not be changed concerning Daniel. Then the king went to his palace and passed the night fasting. Neither were instruments of music brought before him, and his sleep went from him. Because again, he did, favor Daniel, It says, and when he came to the den, he cried with a lamentable voice unto Daniel. And the king spake and said to Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living power, thy power whom thou servest continually, able to deliver thee from the lions, right? And he said, and he's basically asking. He ran to the lion's den, right, and asked him, hey, you still alive? Verse 21, then said Daniel unto the king, O king, live forever. My power hath sent his angel and has shut up the lions' mouths, that they have not hurt me, for as much as before him innocency was found in me, and also before thee, O king, have I done no hurt. Now, when you go into, I think it might be the prayer of Azariah, if I'm not mistaken. It might even be, let's see this. Bill and the Dragon. Connie, we'll just jump up a little bit. Bill and Dragon 1 and or verse 29 says, so they came to the king and said, deliver us Daniel, or else we will destroy thee in thine house. Now when the king saw that they pressed him sore, being constrained, he delivered Daniel unto them, who cast him into the lion's den, where he was 6 days. So it was 6 days in that den, man. You know, you would think, right, that them lions would be hungry. In 6 days, in a few days, them lions would be hungry. But see, again, the Lord can do anything, man. You know, Lord made it to where those lions, right, weren't hungry. Verse 32, it says, and in the den there were 7 lions, right? And we know the number 7 is, you know, a number of completion, you know, and it very well could have been more lions, right? It could have been 7 lions exactly, right? It says, and they had given them every day 2 carcasses and 2 sheep, which then were not given to them, to the intent they might devour Daniel. So they purposely didn't feed, you know, those lions, you know. So Daniel was in a position of great trouble, right? About to, you know, go in line. You know, the animals back then were way bigger, man, right? You don't have all the polluted air, polluted food, and polluted waters and so on and so forth that you do today, right? So, you know, everything was different, right? Verse 33 says, now there was in Jewry a prophet called Habakkuk, right? Well, yes, Habakkuk, right? This is the prophet Habakkuk, right? The book Habakkuk says, who had made pottage and had broken bread in a bowl and was going into the field for to bring it to the reapers. But the angel of the Lord said unto Habakkuk, go carry the dinner that thou hast into Babylon unto Daniel, who is in the lion's den. And Habakkuk said, Lord, I never saw Babylon, neither do I know where the den is. Then the angel of the Lord took him by the crown and bare him by the hair of his head, and through the vehemency of his spirit set him in Babylon over the den, right? So the Lord ultimately delivered Habakkuk to give Daniel food, you know. It says, Habakkuk cried, saying, O Daniel, Daniel, take the dinner which the Most High hath sent me. And Daniel said, thou hast remembered me, O power, neither hast thou forsaken them that seek thee and love thee. That's right, man. You know, it says, and so Daniel arose and did eat, and the angel of the Lord set Habakkuk in his own place again immediately. And ultimately what happened is a chariot came and grabbed, you know, and snatched up Habakkuk and brought him over to, Daniel, man. You know, and it could have been, you know, an angel, you know, opening up a portal, right? Or it could have been a chariot, right? I believe, you know, it was a chariot, you know. So let's ultimately go back into Daniel's 6th chapter, right? Because that's what happened, right? And again, the king came and ran right after the days were expired, right? And said, hey, you know, you still alive? And he was still alive, man. You know, it says, continue on verse 23. It says, then was the king exceeding glad for him and commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no manner of hurt was found upon him, because he believed in his power. Right? And again, right, when you go into that word belief, right, the root word of believed is belief, right? When you go into that word belief, it goes back to faith, right? So he had faith, right, in Yahweh Shai, and showed forth, right, which again is interchangeable with loyalty. So he was showing loyalty to the Lord even in the difficult times, you know. And what happened? The Lord delivered him out of that said situation, man, right? Just as we were ultimately reading, right, with Antipas, right? The Lord ultimately made mention, right, of those that were in Pergamum and how they were showing forth their loyalty, right, to the Lord, man. You know, even in that area, right? Because again, it was a hot spot for different, you know, religions, right? A lot of different temples, right, were in, in Pergamum, right? Which you can go back into the commentary and read up a little bit more from where the Revelations 2 and 12, right? And it'll go into that a little bit about some of those different, temples that were there, right? Temple for Zeus, a temple for even some of the, the emperors, man. You had different temples for some of the emperors because they required, right, that they be worshipped, but let's ultimately see, what the end result was, right? Because of his loyalty, the Lord, ultimately exalted him, right? It says, jumping down verse 25, then King Darius wrote unto all people, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied unto you. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom men tremble and fear before the power of Daniel, right? Before Yahweh Shem Shai. You know, it says, and steadfast forever in his kingdom, that which shall not be destroyed, in his dominion shall be even unto the end. He delivereth and rescueth, and he worketh signs and wonders in heaven and in earth, who hath delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. So this Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. So the Lord ultimately made it to where, Daniel prospered. And as we read in Joshua 1 and verse 8, that if you meditate on the word, right? Meditate on the law, statutes, commandments of Yahweh Shemel Shai day and night, then the Lord shall make your way prosperous. Then the Lord shall make you to have good success. Why? Because you have faith, right? You're showing forth that loyalty, man, to Yahweh Shemel Shai overall, right? Daniel, even in the third chapter, right? He didn't, in Daniel's the third chapter, Hananiah, Azariah, Mishael, another example, right? They were told to bow down, right, to Nebuchadnezzar in his image, but they did it, right? And the Lord delivered them in the fire, man. You know what I mean? So this, loyalty is a very heavy and very important, characteristic of the elect, right? Which they will have for Yahweh Shemel Shai, man, right? In all situations and everything, right? Right, when times are good and when times are bad, man, But again, it all boils down to faith, right? Which faith is, when you have faith in Yahweh Shemel Shai, you have loyalty to Yahweh Shemel Shai, But I just wanted to touch on that, man. Again, the second episode of Characteristics of a Righteous Man. Lord will, it was edifying. Lord will, straight to the point. I want to give all praise, honor, glory to Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai, Bahashim, Rechak, Wadash, that belongs to the elder apostles, as the bishops of the great millstone. Till next time, I say shalom.